So hello everyone, and welcome to this first info session on the Racial Justice Fund. Very quickly, I'll talk you through, in terms of agenda, who we are at Trust for London, some of our other program areas beyond this actual fund itself, a bit of background into the Racial Justice Fund and kind of how we got here, the aims and the objectives, the eligibility criteria, which will cover everything from case studies, looking at maybe examples of what's in and what's out. The decision-making process, which will also include timelines, the additional support that we will offer beyond the actual grant itself, and then finally questions and answers. So without further ado, about Trust for London, for those of you who are new to the Trust, we were established 130 years ago, so we've been going for quite some time. We've got a long track record and history within London. Our focus, strategic focus, is on tackling poverty and inequality in London. We roughly give out about 12 million a year, which is equivalent to around 300 grantees at any one time. Our current program areas do reflect what we think are the drivers of poverty in London. We've got 7 different program areas, and I'll come on to those in a minute. We've got 7 different funding priorities. In terms of our main strands to our funding, it's around advice, campaigning / policy influencing, and elements of research as well. And very, very important, we prioritize work where people with first-hand experience of the issues are in the lead, and you'll see that that's the focus also for this one. So in terms of our program areas, we have good homes and neighborhoods, better work, which is about in-work progression and moving people who are in low-paid jobs into better-paid jobs, decent living standards, shared wealth, stronger voices, pathways to settlement, and connected communities. I think it's a good point to note here that whilst some groups may not necessarily be eligible for the Racial Justice Fund, one of our programs, Connected Communities, does have a specific focus on targeting groups from Black and minoritized communities, but with a focus on welfare advice and strengthening voice. There's more detail of that obviously on the website. There are 2 other additional areas of work of our program areas, social investment, which I'll talk a bit about later on, and crowdfunding again, and all of this is on the website. So in terms of background, how we kind of got here, well, the Trust does have a long history of funding work on racial equity. We just haven't necessarily framed it as, or explicitly named it as racial justice. And so for the focus of this, it was really, really important. The rationale behind it was to focus on that sort of building civic, cultural, and political power and transforming systems. The choice of the 2 words is intentional in terms of racial and economic justice, because what it does is it conveys that eliminating anti-Black racism and systemic oppression does require a focus on justice rather than equity. Of course, we're well aware that Black and minority ethnic communities are disproportionately affected by poverty and inequality. We know some of the reasons behind that, systemic issues being an obvious one, and racism being one of those as well. We've also looked internally, as I've mentioned, at some of our own funding, and we've seen where a reasonable number of grants have been awarded to Black and minority-led organizations, but the value of that obviously being less to grants that we've awarded to other groups. In terms of the focus, I'll come on to why economic justice later on. And so the aims and the visions for the Racial Justice Fund is, as we said, is to advance racial and economic justice. Now, you know that our key charitable objective is tackling poverty and inequality. And the reason why there's a focus on economic justice is because there's a clear correlation between poverty and race. It's undeniable, you know, the data, the stats, and the life experiences do confirm the connection. And so we think it's really, really important, the interconnectedness and the overlapping nature of the two issues or focus areas. And so we aim to do this by funding work that has the potential, and I've underlined directly increased incomes and wealth in Black and or minoritized communities, supporting Black and or minority-led organizations in London to build their capacity so they are better equipped to advance the cause of racial and economic justice. And in terms of definitions, we're using the term minoritized communities to describe communities experiencing racial inequity. And I say that because I know a few people have asked the question, you know, when you say minorities, what do you mean? So hopefully that provides some clarity on that. In terms of who is eligible to apply, so organizations, not individuals, we're very clear on that. There's a focus on those organizations being majority led by people from Black and, excuse the minoritized, the Z, it's, you know, the computer does that by itself. So Black and minoritized communities, and we're saying 75% trustees and 50% senior staff. We want to give priority, or really interested in giving priority to work that has an intersectional approach, and that also reflects the overlapping and the interconnected systems of oppression and disadvantage that people experience. So it could be race and gender, race and age. An approach that basically resources a sort of a collaborative approach to reduce competition between organizations. And I say that specifically because I you know, from experience and certainly from the data, we know that skilling up one organization or one community doesn't directly lead to narrative change. But when we skill up networks of people who are already in relationship with one another, and who already have a foundation of trust and are in strategic alignment, then it's possible to really scale up and to deepen impact. Obviously, this requires quite a comprehensive approach. So we're really interested in those sorts of approaches. Organizations have to be set up with at least 3 trustees or directors. I'm saying specifically for CIC, so community interest companies. If you have 3 directors, one of those directors has to be independent of the other 2, in that they can provide some visibility to the accounts, the management of the accounts. So it could be an independent director or a board member, an advisory board member, but someone basically that can provide some oversight as to how accounts are managed. Work obviously that takes place in London and or benefiting Londoners, and you know, obviously undertaking charitable activities, but you don't necessarily need to be a registered charity. So what we will not fund, very, very important, from individuals, from mainstream public services, including schools and hospitals, from organizations which have fewer than 3 people on their governing body, for the promotion of religion, for general appeals, for work that has already taken place, from organizations that hold significant free reserves. Typically we say the reserves, you know, that amounts to about 9 months worth of expenditure is acceptable, but anything beyond that, I think there will need to be a really strong rationale for why that is. From organizations in serious financial deficits, for capital costs, including building and renovations, although we do allow small items of office equipment such as computers. I mean, if there are projects obviously that are capital in nature, then that's something we can explore through our social investment, because again, that's an area that we are really keen. We recognize that not a lot of investment goes to Black and minority-led organizations, and we are keen to do more of that through our social investment work. I've highlighted service delivery because I think this is a really important area. Typically, I get it that when a fund of this nature comes up, initially looking at it, it feels like it will do everything and anything. And I think it's important to say that 4 million isn't a huge amount of money. And we need to really think about where that 4 million can add the most value, where we think that money can go. And so we've given examples of the sorts of stuff that we while we recognize that stuff is really, really important. The mentoring, the stuff like the mental health support, well-being, access to employment support programs, all of those are really valuable. However, this fund isn't for that. Now, I'm coming on to the aims. So I strongly encourage you to, when you're thinking through your expressions of interest, to really pay close attention to the two aims. Now, you don't necessarily have to fit across both of them. It could very well be that your work cuts across both aims. However, it's important that your work does fit under one of those aims. So under aim 1, we're really looking to fund work that has potential to directly increase incomes and wealth. We've given some examples of the sort of stuff that potentially we're looking to see. So measures that address inequalities in pay and participation. There's been some really interesting stuff around ethnicity pay reporting. We know now that most companies now do have to report on their gender pay gaps, but there isn't really anything around ethnicity pay reporting. So we're particularly interested in campaigns that might look to focus on that. Targeted programs to address barriers facing people from Black and minoritized communities who are underrepresented in growth industries. And I'll come on to what we mean, because I think oftentimes it's easy to read that, and the sort of stuff that we might see coming through is employability programs or mentoring schemes. That's the service delivery stuff, which is valuable, but that's not the focus of this. The focus is on campaigns, is on research, advocacy, influencing, policy. That's what where we think we can add value, and it's very much in line with our current funding priorities. So work that looks to address the disproportionate pension income gap based on ethnicity, and work to increase access to low-cost finance. I've given a case study here, and I focused specifically on targeted programs to address barriers facing people from Black and minoritized communities within sort of growth industries / well-paid jobs, because I suspect it's one of the areas that lots of organizations potentially will look to apply. So this is an example of an organization that works with Black professionals within the construction and engineering industry. Now, we know that industry is a growth industry in itself. When you look at the level of development happening within London, and they're looking to carry out some research just to try and better understand the landscape, and the support for people from Black and minoritized communities who do work in those industries, but they're concentrated in the sort of lower parts of, the industry. They then want to use that data to be able to campaign and advocate for increasing access and opportunities for people from, Black and minoritized communities, into more senior roles in the industry. They've got really good relationships in place already. And so what they're really looking to do is to build capacity, build, that organizing, campaigning capacity within their organization so they can start to do more of the influencing work and really try and influence the sector. One of the things they also want to look at is just even the number of, sole traders and people from Black and minoritized communities who do run their own construction firms, but who are not properly represented in terms of, how contracts are awarded. Oftentimes what happens is that, within that particular industry, contracts are awarded to the bigger, more established firms. And so they, looking to influence that process and to campaign for, better support around that. So that's an example of the sorts of things that we're really interested in. Another example, and I was just talking to a colleague of mine, this is kind of practical experience. And I gave the example of, years ago when I worked with a colleague, and, he had given me the example of his son at the time, who was really young, but had been able to get onto the property ladder as a result, obviously, of, kind of first generation wealth and things like that. And we know that there is a link between ownership of property, of assets, and poverty and employment. So again, just really interested in projects or campaigns that look to explore some of those links. There's a really good report published by Positive Money. I believe it's on our website, so please do have a look at it. That also tries to unpick and explore the relationships between housing and race. So on the aim 2, what we'll look to fund is obviously to build the capacity of Black and minority-led organizations to be able to advocate for change. As I've said earlier on, we're really interested in being able to forge alliances between organizations. Whilst we don't want to push people to work together, we do think there is value certainly in helping organizations to think through that. And just to say at this point, if there are organizations that are potentially looking to explore partnerships with other organizations, but you're not quite sure what that looks like, we are also offering development grants to help you think through potentially what that might look like, what that partnership could look like, who does what within the partnership, what the governance of that looks like, what sort of campaign or project, are you looking to work on. So do mention that in your expression of interest, and we will explore that conversation separately. We're also interested in piloting organizations that are looking to pilot new ideas or to scale existing campaigns, and really supporting organizations to be able to translate their frontline experience, as we say, into effective influencing and policy advocacy for change. Again, there might be organizations who have been doing the service delivery stuff for quite some time, but actually, they do want to be able to think about, the sort of the next bit of that, which is, the influence in the policy, the campaigning. How do they take all of that experience, all of that track record, and translate that into effective influencing, whether that's publication of pieces of research and learning through what they've been doing, and then using that to influence, the particular sector that they work in, then, absolutely, we're also open to that. Case study number 2, in terms of what we will not fund, service delivery, as we've mentioned. So this is an example of an organization that, has basically said they're looking to increase economic empowerment within the community by engaging individuals, stakeholders, employers to address barriers to workplace progression and barriers to employment. Now, we do have a program area, Better Work, that is focused on that. And some of the elements within and I think particularly the elements within the proposal, stuff around support with identifying UK qualification equivalents, obtaining education and employment history evidence, access to training or language classes. All of that stuff is really valuable, but it's just not what this fund is about. So I really encourage you to, pay very, very good attention to the guidance. There will be opportunities for you to speak to a grant manager, and all of that will come up at the end in terms of how you'll be able to do that. We'll also be offering a sort of a drop-in session a week before the end of the close of the day for the expressions of interest. So just an opportunity for you again to just drop in if you've got any questions before you submit. So yeah, very, very important to mention that. In terms of outcomes, some of the outcomes that we are hoping to see through this, obviously, this is about increasing access to power and resources that's needed to create economic wealth. If we're able to see stronger alliances and movements of Black and minoritized communities, working effectively together to try and shift, decisions and policymakers on key issues, increased income and economic wealth amongst Black and minoritized communities, and then of course reduce racial and economic inequalities caused by racialization within those communities. So how we decide who to fund. The shortlisting criteria, these are the sorts of things that we'll be looking for. A very clear case for how your work will advance racial and economic justice within Black and minoritized communities. And one thing I will emphasize is, just keep the language really simple. No sort of nebulous language or jargon to basically put it. Keep it as simple as possible. If possible, use the framework of who are you, what do you do, what are you proposing to do, how will you do it, why do you think this work is important, and how will it advance racial and economic justice. When, over what period of time are you proposing to do this? Just, in a sense, just use that kind of framework and play that back to yourself. You can do one-liners under that framework, and then play that back to yourself. And what you realize is that even if it's just one sentence or one line, you then have, a short sort of paragraph or summary of exactly what your proposal is about. What that does is it's then helpful to then unpick that a bit more by asking you, more questions around it. So keep the language really, really simple, and just make a really clear case, for how your work will do that. Of course, what we're looking to see is strong and meaningful engagement of people directly affected by poverty and inequality within the leadership of the organization, within the service design, within the campaign. So, how will the very communities that you're looking to support, or the work that how are their voices helping to influence or to shape, your project or your campaign or your proposal? Does it have potential to have significant influence and impact? So, we talked about some of the funds, some of the outcomes we're hoping to achieve from the fund. does your project have the potential to do that? What are the skills, the experience within the organization to undertake the proposed work? Is the work of a high quality? And we're very, very open to funding work that can be seen as challenging or risky or difficult to get funding for. And there's a note at the bottom, and again, this just plays back to this. This is about really having this clear commitment to working more than individuals. But how does your work really contribute to achieving systemic change as it pertains to racial economic injustice? And is there part of your work that seeks to collaborate with others? So in terms of the process, read the guidelines, very, very important. There will be an opportunity to speak to a grants manager. The first, there's 2 stages to it. So stage 1 is you fill out the online expression of interest. You have until the 27th of June to do that. It's a really short summary of what you're proposing to do, and just captures just some standard bits of information around your organization, so governance and the rest of it. And then through that, we will then obviously sift that. We will have a read of those EOIs, and if we think it's an obvious fit, if we think there's something interesting there, we will then invite you to stage 2, which is then to fill out an application. Again, it's a really condensed application. We're not asking for reams of information. We're mindful of the capacity of some organizations, so all of that has been taken into consideration. And the things within the application that you'll be asked beyond the expression of interest, so is tell us basically about your project. You can then go into a bit more detail about your proposal. You also have the opportunity to upload your budget, and yes, the EOI form is available now on the website. So yeah, if you go on the website, it's available. But yes, within the application form, you also have the opportunity to upload your budget. And I would say that when uploading your budget, be really clear in your budget about what it is you're seeking funding for. Make sure your line items are very clear and it relates well to the project. Following that, then there will be assessment visits. These will happen hybrid. Will offer organizations the opportunity to have in-person or Zoom meetings. Key dates. So no, we mentioned we don't fund general appeals. Does that also exclude? No. So will provide. Sorry, the fund will provide for core funding. Yes, it's flexible. So all of this is actually in the guidance and it's on the website. So the fund itself is flexible. It can go towards project, towards core costs. So yes, general appeals. If I can give a good example of a general appeal, it's implicit in the name. Something just really generic. But yes, we will provide. The fund does provide for core funding. If you hold a current grant, yes, you can apply also. However, it would need to be really clear how distinctive, that work is from, the current grant that you hold. So current grantees can still apply to the trust, but we'll just need to be really clear about the difference between what you're applying for and the existing grant that you hold. So hopefully that answers those questions. Key dates, we obviously launch flexibility in the one-to-one dates. So the dates are the 30th, the 31st, and the 1st of June. I do appreciate they are within the half term, which is why we had offered, which is why the 30th and the 31st. but I've also said there will be the additional drop-in session the week of the 20th, Thursday the 23rd of June. So that's a week of, well, a few days before the close of the EOIs. And that will just be an opportunity to drop in and speak. I can't see that full question, but I'll come to it. We'll come to the questions in a second. And you can also call the grant managers. We are offering grants of up to 5 years. So again, we're flexible in terms of terms. So grants can be up to 5 years. Hopefully that answers that question. So yes, for the question around flexibility on booking calls with the GM. So beyond the 3 dates, so we're not, we've been careful not to stipulate exact amounts. What we want organizations to do is to tell us how much they need. Is it commensurate with the project or the proposal, or what they're seeking funding for? And we will take a decision on that. And obviously, depending on how much is then left available in the pot of money. As I mentioned, this is 4 million. It's not a huge amount of money, but it's a start, and certainly it's a stepping stone in the right direction. There is definitely a long-term strategic commitment from both Trust for London and City Bridge Trust to really addressing and to tackling issues around racial and economic injustice. So please do bear that in mind. So I'm not giving any guidance on how much you can apply for. Within your project, you tell us what exactly you need. And that's just purely based on evidence from feedback from grantees and previous programs, and just general sector-wide feedback. We're not saying here is 100,000 and then you try and make a project fit into 100,000. No. No, not 4 million per year. So 4 million over the 2 years. So there are 2 rounds to this. So round 1 is this between 2020 to 2023. Round 2 is 2023 to 2024. So for organizations that are not able to apply in round 1, don't panic. There is round 2. So it's 4 million split over the 2 years. I hope that answers the question. So, sorry, just going back to the key dates. You're welcome, Wendy. Going back to the key dates. Monday, the 8th of July, successful applicants, successful expressions of interest will then be invited to apply. You have, roughly over a month, 6 weeks or so thereabouts before the close of the call for applications. We will then look to shortlist the week of the 12th of September, and assessment visits, invitations for assessment visits will be sent out week of the 26th of September, and then we'll hope to carry out the visits between the 10th and the 21st of October. We've definitely factored in half term and things like that into that, and then with a view to making decisions the week of the 14th of November. So successful applicants will find out that week. It's entirely up to you. You can let us know when you are proposing to start the project. Again, we're not. There's no hard and fast rule around project start dates. You're best placed to let us know when your projects are starting. And these will all come up in conversations with the grant managers. So beyond grants, so I mentioned that alongside the grant making, we can also support organizations through social investment. And this is funding that, unlike a grant, it is repaid. But I will say one thing, with Trust for London is that in terms of social investment, it's very concessional finance. A really good example of a project that we've supported is an organization called Well Grounded Coffee. They're based in Tower Hamlets. They work with people from underrepresented communities and help them to basically gain access into employment, more so within the coffee industry. So they train them to become coffee baristas, and we invested in them to help them build their capacity in terms of expanding their team to be able to take on more commissioned contracts. So that's something that we can also explore through social investment if the Racial Justice Fund isn't a fit or isn't right for you. And there's no time scale to approaching us. If that's something you're interested in doing, then feel free to say so, and we can pick up the conversation through the team. So beyond the grants, what we're also doing is something called Funding Plus. Now, some of you might be aware of it through some other programs or some other funds that you are in receipt of from other trusts and foundations. And this is really capacity building for funded organizations. So it could be stuff around helping you with governance, helping you to think through your governance strategy, impact. How do you evaluate the impact of your work? How do you develop a theory of change? And in addition to that, we also offer one-to-one and peer learning and networking opportunities. The brief for that hasn't come out, but once that's out, we're hoping that an organization will provide that support to funded grantees. We'll put out a tender for that soon. So if you want to book a call to discuss your request, you can do so via the website, www.trustforlondon.org.uk, or email my colleagues, Rebecca, Tripta, or myself. So it's the three of us working on this program. There is obviously the wider grants team, but if you've got any specific questions around the racial justice, then please do speak to my colleague, Rebecca, my colleague Tripta, who's also here, and also my colleague Jazz, who's also supporting through this as well.